In this video, I'm going to go over the basics of HTML. So HTML stands for Hypertext Markup Language, and it is the language used to define the document structure for an HTML website. And so by document structure, we mean things like lists and paragraphs and headings and tables. Other technologies handle other aspects. So CSS handles styling and layout. JavaScript handles things like behaviors of a website. So HTML looks like this. It's made up of these HTML elements. And our first one is going to be open bracket, exclamation mark, doc type, and then HTML. So this element here is telling the browser that this document has the type HTML. So it's telling it you should be prepared to render an HTML document. And then we're going to make another HTML element. I'm going to say open HTML. And then I'm going to say /HTML for a close HTML. So this HTML and this HTML together are the HTML element. We would say that this is the opening tag and this is the closing tag. And closing tags will have this slash before the actual, HTML element type there. So in this case, HTML. And what this element is saying is this is the actual HTML document itself. So it's actually defining the HTML document itself. And then we'll put another HTML element in here called head. So we'll say head and then close head. And this is defining the actual meta information about the document. So things like the title of the document, that's what we put in here. You typically see information about the document placed in the head element here. So inside of this, I'm going to say title, and I'll say here common cold, because we're going to make an HTML document about the common cold. So we'll say title, close title. And we'll save that there. And if I do a refresh over here, actually, we can see the result. So I've actually saved this as a file called demo.html on my desktop. And then if I were to open this over here, just open demo.html on my desktop, I'll get the result, right? And all we can see right now is that we made the title common cold. That title shows up right here in the browser tab there. So then we'll make another HTML element called body. We'll say open body, close body. And if the head contains information about the document, the body actually defines the document content and structure. So this is where we're going to put the actual stuff that we want rendered as part of the website, like tables and lists and all kinds of stuff like that. So open body, close body, and then we'll make our first sort of HTML element in here. We'll make a paragraph here. I'm going to say open P and then close P. So this element here defines a paragraph, and the content we put in here will be rendered as a paragraph. So what does that mean, like rendered as a paragraph? That means that the HTML document is defining a paragraph, and when the browser actually goes to render this content, it's going to treat it as a paragraph. So I could say here, like, the common cold is a viral infectious disease of the upper respiratory tract. And I'll save that there, and I do a refresh here. So I get the common cold is a viral infectious disease of the upper respiratory tract. And I've got this zoomed in quite a bit just so we can see the text. I can hit like Command minus or Command plus to zoom in and out. And I've just zoomed it in quite a bit just so we can see the text. But what's going on here is the browser just takes this text and renders as a paragraph. So this is interesting for a couple of reasons. Number one is we don't see like the open P and close P in the browser here, right? Because what's going on is the browser basically takes this document and interprets it. And it says like, they want a paragraph here. It doesn't take it and just display it as plain text like this in the actual text editor. It's taking it and it's rendering it. It's using these elements to determine how and what should be displayed. So in this case, it's saying this is a paragraph. Now this isn't too exciting because like right now it's just taking the text we've got here and it's just rendering it like this. And it's just exactly the same as we've got it here. But the way that things are rendered versus the way they're defined in the document actually kind of matters. So I'll give you an example here. If we put in a bunch of new lines here, so if I just put in a bunch of enters here, I put in a bunch of new lines here. These are all kind of new lines here, right? And then I put a bunch of spaces here. So I'll put a space in between the common and cold, a bunch of spaces here. And I save it here. If I do a refresh, I just refreshed it there. You can't even tell, right? I did a refresh there. It renders it the exact same way as before. And that's because these elements here matter quite a bit. So this paragraph element is saying render this content as a paragraph. So because of that, when the browser goes to render it, these new lines here and these spaces here, it doesn't want those because that's not really a paragraph, right? To just do that. So it just actually doesn't really acknowledge them when it's rendering it. It doesn't include them, right? but they're still there. Like they're still in the document. They're still in the HTML document. It's just the browser renders the document, and rendering it does not always mean displaying things exactly as they might be sort of written in the document here. So if you right click and you go to view page source, this will actually show the actual HTML content. So we'll go right click view page source. This shows the actual HTML content here. And you can see like there's our file there with like the common cold, and you've got like the bunch of spaces there, and you got the new lines here. And that is what the browser is rendering. It's just that when it goes to render it, it treats it like that because it's a paragraph. And so that's our first sort of HTML element there is the p tag, and that's to define paragraphs. So a couple things here. I've been using the word tag. I've been using the word element. So, and I'll probably use those interchangeably because I can't help it. And you'll find that most people tend to do that as well. So technically speaking, this is a tag, and that's the opening tag. And technically speaking, this is a tag, and that's the closing tag. And together, they make up the HTML element. So this whole thing, like the two tags together, they're the HTML element. Now in practice, people don't typically make that distinction, and often I won't as well. Just by force of habit, I'll call things a tag when they're an element. I'll call things an element when they're a tag. It's not a huge deal in practice, but just be aware of that. The other thing you should notice is we're kind of spacing in here. We're using these spaces here to kind of go in each time we kind of nest one tag inside of another. So we would say that like this title tag here is nested inside of this head tag. It's contained inside of this head tag. We would say that this title tag here, this title element here, see, I just did it. This title element here, we'd say this is a child of the head, right? And that's sort of the relationship there. It's very frequent to see spaces or tabs used to delineate which elements are contained within other elements, because it makes the document sort of easier to read than if it were like this. So if we had it like this with, oops, I'm trying to do a shift tab here. So I'm highlighting this, I'm gonna hit shift tab. All right, there you go. If I just had the document like this is harder to read, right? Because it's kind of like which thing is inside which other thing, right? It's not even a big file yet. It's already kind of hard to read. It's like, it's less clear that like head is inside of HTML and title is inside of head. Whereas what I had before, it was very clear due to this indenting here, what is inside of what is contained inside of what is a child, what is a parent, right? And so we typically speaking want to do that. You want to use either spaces or tabs to indent your file. I like using spaces. Some people like using tabs. It actually kind of does make a bit of a difference, and that's a bit of a thing in programming, but it does make a bit of a difference because with spaces, it'll always be read the same from one text editor to the next. With a tab character, it'll actually depend on what that editor's setting is for interpreting a tab. So it might be 2 spaces if the editor is set to insert 2 spaces when there's a tab character, or it might be 4 spaces if the editor is set to interpret a tab as 4 spaces. So just be aware of that. But this is our first tag here. This is our first element here, a paragraph element here that's actually sort of adding some content to our document here. We'll put in another paragraph here. So I'll say P, and I'll say the typical symptoms of a cold include cough, runny nose, sneezing, we'll say nasal congestion, and a sore throat. And we've got another paragraph in there now. If I save this and run it, we see it's rendered as another paragraph there. And that's a separate paragraph now, right? So these are both 2 distinct paragraphs, and a paragraph will start on a new line like this. And that's just the behavior of the element, is it'll start a new line like that. And again, it doesn't really matter that I have a space here. Like, so similar to what I was saying before, like the spacing inside this document of things doesn't matter so much as the elements here, right? So if I put this one up here like this and save it and do a refresh, we get the exact same thing as before. This is the exact same, in terms of how it's rendered, it's the same thing as before. And that's because like the spacing inside the document doesn't matter so much as the elements and their behavior. And the behavior of a P tag, the behavior of this P element here, is that it's going to start the content in that paragraph on a new line. So just be aware of that. So that's the P element, and that's for making paragraphs. Another element is called a comment. And a comment can be used to actually comment about the document or something in the document. So I could say like open bracket, exclamation mark, dash, dash, and then we do dash, dash, and then close bracket. And here I'm going to say my first paragraph. And what this is this is a comment about the document content, basically saying like, this is my first paragraph in the document. And we might use comments like this to explain the code in the document. We'd use it to explain like what's going on in the document. So I could save this and refresh it. It won't appear at all over here. If I do a view page source, then it will show up in here in this sort of view page source view of things. So be aware of that. If you do put comments in an HTML document, then the visitors to your website will be able to see those comments. So you wouldn't want to put something in there like, I really blew it with this code here, because then people would see that. But just be aware of that. Now, one place you might see a comment is like maybe at the top of the file. Maybe it talks about what the file is about. So you could say like ! And I'll say here HTML basics example. And I'll say like author is Kevin Brown. I'll put my name there and save it. And this sort of a header comment, you might see that sometimes, just sort of defining what the document's about, just saying this is an HTML basics example, here's the author, and so forth. Another place that you might see comments is sometimes people use comments to comment things out. So by comment things out, what we mean is use a comment to enclose other code that we no longer want to think about. So let's say that I've showed you these paragraph elements here, and I'm kind of done with them for now. Like I want to show you something else, but I don't want to get rid of them entirely because I'm going to just sort of use them again soon. What I could do is I could enclose these elements in a comment and sort of comment them out for now. And a lot of times developers will do that as they're coding just to sort of momentarily get rid of some code before they need to use it again later. So I'm going to say here, open bracket, ! dash dash. And then I'm going to take this and I'm going to put it down here. So what I've done here is I've enclosed these paragraphs in a comment element here. And they're now commented out, which means that they're treated as text. They're treated as a comment. They're treated as content sort of about the document. They're no longer considered part of the document because you can even see by the highlighting, right? So if I save this here and I do a refresh now over here, we get nothing. Because what's happened is this is all a comment now, right? And the reason why I might do this is momentarily I might want to sort of get rid of something just so that way I can work on something else first. And then maybe when I'm ready, maybe when it's time to reintegrate this stuff, take out the comments and kind of reintegrate it again. So we'll do that actually. Something I'm going to show you for now is how headings work. So headings kind of describe the different areas of a document. They're like headings in a book. You might have like a chapter and then you have like subsections, or you have like a book title and then you have like chapters and then sections and then subsections. Heading elements give us this ability to have that sort of a hierarchical delineation of content in our document. So the H1 header, we're going to say common cold and then close H1. So H1, open H1, and then close H1. This is defining the highest level heading in our document. And if I save this and do a refresh over here, I'll have to zoom down a bit now, a refresh over here, I see common cold here. So H1 and close H1, they're defining the sort of most important heading in our document. And typically you really only want to have one H1 element in your document because it's basically supposed to be specifying like, this is what the document is about. This document is about the common cold. And then you can have other headings that are less prominent, of less importance, that are intended as subheadings, right? And so like this document is about the common cold, but maybe we'll have a subheading on symptoms. So we'll say like symptoms. And then we'll say here, H2 symptoms, close H2. And so H2 is basically it's basically supposed to be like a subheading of H1. It's like the next level down of headings, right? Whatever you want to think of them as. If you think of them as chapters this is the book title and these are chapters, that's a fine way to think of it, right? And so H2 symptoms, this is now defining like a lower level of heading. So if I save this here and refresh it, we'll see common cold and we'll see symptoms. And you notice that symptoms has a smaller font size than common cold. So you might think that's the intention of the heading tag, is that like a heading tag, depending on the number here, it's going to sort of decrease the font size based on that. Don't get too caught up on that. So the browsers have default ways of rendering things. So they have a default way of rendering like H1 elements and H2 elements. And that's all well enough, but that's not the purpose of the element. So the purpose of the H2 element is not that it has a smaller font size than the H1 element. The purpose of the H2 element is to define a heading that is sort of like the second level down. That's not a top level heading. That's the purpose of it. Now, we would use a tool called CSS, another language, to actually style things however we like. But because browsers have to do something with this, if we haven't styled them with CSS, the default behavior is, and it makes sense, the default behavior is, okay, make it like an H1 element, but it's going to have a decreased font size, right? So that's what we get there. And that's an H2 element. Now we could say here H2, and we could say, maybe let's have another thing here. We'll say causes, close H2, and then we'll make one more here. We'll say more information. So I'll say more information, close H2. And save this and refresh it. And now we've got like our main heading here, common cold, and we have like our three sort of prominent headings for what are going to be subsections here, symptoms, causes, and more information. We could also have another layer of headings. It actually goes all the way down to H6, but we're going to go down to H3. So we could say here like H3, and let's say underneath causes, we'll have a couple subheadings as well. So we'll say H3, and we'll say viruses, and H3, and we're going to say here transmission. Because maybe underneath causes, we're going to talk about like the viruses that cause the common cold and how the virus is transmitted. So we'll save this here, do a refresh, and now you see like the font sizes again decreased a bit more. Not really the purpose of it, but that's what it's doing. And these are now sort of intended as subheadings of causes here. And this heading structure here from H1, H2, H3, it actually does matter from the standpoint of programs that are going to interpret the document. So for example, web search engines like Google, they scour the internet looking at websites and trying to categorize them, right? By using H1 and H2 and H3 elements properly, we're telling those tools how our document is made up and what it's covering. So like by saying like H1, common cold, close H1, we're essentially telling software like Google out there that like this document is about a common cold. And it's going to talk about symptoms and causes, and there's going to be more information as well, viruses and transmission, right? We're telling it like these are the things that our document is covering. And so it's actually kind of important from that respect as well. Things like assistive technologies that help to read websites for people as well, they also rely on the document being properly structured with the right sort of heading elements used in the right ways to identify prominent information for people, right? So it's important from that respect as well. And it does go all the way down to H6, just so you know. So you could say like H4, and we could say like coronavirus here, and do a refresh there, and we'll get coronavirus now. So it does go all the way down to H6, just so you know. I've never actually made a website that goes all the way down to H6, but you can do that. So now that I've kind of, included my headings here, maybe I actually want to uncomment this code here now and include it under the right headings. So I could delete this here. I'll delete the end of the comment there, and I'll copy and paste this, or I'll cut and paste this up here. Oops, I made a mistake there. So I'll cut it there, paste it there. And this is symptoms, so I'll cut this here. And I'll scroll up here, and I'll paste it here underneath symptoms. And now we've kind of got, paragraphs under headings. So if I save this here and do a refresh, we have common cold, we have a paragraph underneath it. We have symptoms, we have a paragraph underneath it, right? And this is, now beginning to look like a website. It's got a long ways to go. It's starting to look like a website here. So those are some common elements. Another really important element is the link element. So the link element allows us to actually link to other websites, and it allows us to create what's called a hyperlink. Most people just call it link nowadays, but hyperlink was the terminology when the web was first created, and that's still the terminology now. But we'll make a paragraph here, and I'm going to say, read the common cold Wikipedia article for more information, period, and I'll close the paragraph. And I'll save this here. So what I've got here is a paragraph, but I want to make this text here, common cold Wikipedia article, I want to make that a link to the common cold Wikipedia article. So to do that, I can just actually create this link element. And it looks like this. You say open bracket A, and then I'm going to say over here, close A. So I've got the open A tag and the close A tag. And if I just save it like this, it actually won't really do anything just yet. That actually does nothing just yet, because what I need to do is I need to tell the link where to go. So when the user clicks on this, it should go to a certain website. And to do that, I'm going to use what's called an HTML attribute. So I'm going to say in here, href is equal to, and then I have a quote, an open double quote and a closed double quotes. These are both double quotes there, right? So href is equal to, and then double quote, double quote. So this is what's called an attribute. And an attribute is basically telling the browser something about how this element is supposed to behave. And in this case, what it's telling it is it should be a link to the URL specified inside of these double quotes here. So I'm going to go get the common cold URL for the Wikipedia article. So I'll say common cold Wikipedia. I'll go get the link and I'll copy it here. And I'm going to paste it in here. So what this is this is now going to be a link to this article here. So I save this here, do a refresh, and notice how it's rendered differently here now. So it says read the common cold Wikipedia article, and it's highlighted in terms of the color being different and there being an underline, right? And if I click on it, it actually takes me to this URL here. So I've actually now made a link here, and it's just open a tag, close a tag, and then you have this href attribute where you have href is equal to, and then you have some content over here, which is basically this open double quote, close double quote, and a URL or some other sort of specifier here for what the link is supposed to be to. And here I'm linking to this common cold Wikipedia article. So that's our first link there. There's other attributes we could use as well. So one thing that you might see on the web is sometimes you'll be on a website, you click on a link, and it opens up in a new tab. You can do that as well with another attribute. So we could put an attribute here, target is equal to open bracket underscore blank close bracket. So this is another attribute here, target, and it's set to the value here, underscore blank. So this is going to be telling the browser that I want you to open this up in a new tab. So I can do a refresh here and click on this now, and it opens up the link in a new tab. Sometimes you see people do that when the link is to some external website. And the idea is that they're basically kind of keeping you on their website, but opening up this external website in a new tab. And target is equal to underscore blank will do that. So that's that. Now we could always put in more content. So maybe underneath transmission here, we could put some more content. We could say like the common cold virus can be transmitted via airborne droplets. And we could put in like more content here. So the common cold may be transmitted via contaminated objects. And then we'll just save this here. We'll do a refresh here. Okay, so there's some transmission information there. And then for viruses, we should probably put some data under there as well, underneath viruses. So underneath viruses, we're going to say the common cold can be caused by many different viruses. I'll close that P element and we'll do a refresh over here. We've got another paragraph there. And so now our document's starting to look more complete here now in terms of actually having content underneath the relevant headings as well. So a couple of other HTML elements we should talk about though. So let's talk about the image element. So the image element allows us to display an image on our website here. And we could actually go grab a image from the common cold, we'll say common cold Wikipedia article. Yeah, we'll actually grab an image right from this website here. So we'll scroll down here. We'll find this respiratory tract image here. And I'm just going to click on it here. And we've got the link to it here. So this is the link to the image there. That's a URL for that image there. I'm going to copy it here. And what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to try to display this image on my website here. So I'm going to try to display this image here on my website here. And what I'll do is I'll put it right underneath this paragraph here. And I'm going to use the image element. So I'm going to say img, and I'm going to have an attribute here, src is equal to, and I'm going to copy in the link. Then I'm going to close the tag there. So a couple things here. This is another attribute. This attribute is src for source, for the image source. And I'm saying is equal to, and then I'm giving the URL for the image that I want on my site here. So it's kind of interesting that I can actually do this. I can actually take an image from somewhere else on the web and display it on my website here. That's actually something you can do. The other thing that's interesting is this HTML element here has no closing tag. So like H1 has like open H1, close H1. P has open H1, close P. This is a singleton HTML element where it only has one tag. There is no closing tag. So for this one here, by practice, we're going to put slash before this close bracket here. So this slash here before the close bracket. And that's what you do when you've got sort of one, when you've got an HTML element that has one tag to it. So we'll save this here and we're going to do a refresh, but it's not going to be very pretty. We'll do a refresh. And actually it actually did look okay. Sometimes it kind of blows up too big depending on what you've got things set to in terms of the width and stuff like that. But there's our image there, and it's now included on our website. And this is another thing where like the browser renders the website. So the browser goes out and says like, okay, they want this image. I better go fetch it. And the browser fetches it and then includes it in the rendered version of this page here. Now there's a couple other attributes we might want to use with the image element. One is called width. So I could say here width is equal to, and I could say maybe like 100, and I'll save it there. What this will do is it'll make the image have a width of 100 pixels. I could change it to like 500, and now it has 500 pixels, and it's like too big now basically. So you could use width to actually change the width of the image, and it will maintain the aspect ratio of the image. So it'll keep the height in line with this width. So that way the image doesn't get distorted or something like that. But I could say here like width, and I could say maybe 200, and we'll do a refresh. And maybe we'll say like 200 is about right. So we'll say width is 200. We're happy with that image width there. Now the image does have to be large enough that the width is not going to distort the image. If you try to take an image that is only 50 pixels and you try to make it have a width of 2000, it's not going to be very nice looking. But be aware of that. You can use this width attribute to change the width of the image as well. Another attribute you might want to use with images as well that you really should use is the alt attribute. And the alt attribute is going to specify alternate text for the image. So in other words, if the image can't be rendered for some reason, maybe Wikipedia is down. And so because Wikipedia is down, we can't fetch the image. The browser can't find the image. The alt attribute specifies alternative text to display in that case. So we're going to say here alt is equal to, and I'll say respiratory tract. And this becomes like the alt text we'd say for the image. And if I do a refresh, we don't really see anything, like nothing shows up. If I mouse over it, it may show up. Oh, it doesn't in this case. Okay, it doesn't quite show up in this case. But it's basically specifying the alternate text. So let's say Wikipedia is not down, but let's say that I misspelled the URL here. So the URL is misspelled. If I do a refresh here, the browser is not going to be able to find this image because this is not a valid URL to the image anymore, right? Like if I put in like that URL here, missing the G, and hit enter, we get like file not found, right? It's not going to be a valid image URL anymore. So because of that, the browser here is not going to be able to find the image to render it. So if I save this into a refresh, it doesn't work anymore. Because it doesn't work anymore, because the browser can't fetch the image anymore, the alternative text displays, and we get respiratory tract here. So that matters if the image can't be displayed for some reason, like maybe the website's down or maybe the image URL is wrong or something like that. But it's actually important for a couple of reasons, really. The other reason is that the screen readers, the assistive technologies people use to consume websites, they rely on things like this as well. So it's very important for meeting requirements with regards to accessibility too. So some other HTML elements are the strong and emphasis elements. So the strong element looks like this. We could say the common cold is we'll say strong, we'll say viral infectious disease, and then we'll say close strong. And then we'll do a refresh over here. And we get this bolded behavior where we get viral infectious disease is now bolded. So, again, that's the default behavior of the browser for this element, is that it's going to bold the text. And a lot of people will use strong as a way of bolding text. There actually is an old, now dated element called open called B, so B close B, and strong has basically replaced it. But browsers will actually still often interpret these old elements correctly. They'll still interpret them as the writer would be intended. And you do a refresh here and it'll still be sort of bolded like that, right? But nowadays we're going to want to use the strong element. So you say strong, close strong, don't use B anymore. But strong, technically speaking, doesn't really stand for bold. It doesn't mean like display in bold. In the same way that like, H1 doesn't mean display the text with a particular font size. Strong means like this text is important somehow. It's delineating sort of the level of importance of the text. It's not delineating how to render the text in terms of making it bold, but the default behavior for the browser is going to be to make it bold. But the intention is that we could use CSS to say, I want to make my strong element contents look this way. And we're going to talk about how to use CSS to sort of alter how things are displayed. Another element that's a little bit similar is the emphasis element, the EM element. So we could say open EM, and then I'm going to say here close EM. And this element here is the emphasis element, and it's going to emphasize text. So we could do a refresh over here, and we get the italicized behavior where it says like upper respiratory tract, and it's italicized. Now you might think based on this that, again, this is about italicizing text. Again, same thing as the strong element. That's not really what it's about. That's the default browser behavior, is to italicize the text. Really what the element is about is saying that this text is emphasized. And if we wanted to sort of alter that styling in terms of what it should be from the default behavior, again, that's where CSS comes in. So one more thing we'll talk about is lists. So lists allow us to create a list of data. That's a common way to present data. We might want to like list out possible symptoms, for example. We can construct lists with HTML elements as well. So here I'm going to say P, and I'll say other symptoms include, and then I'm going to make a list here. So I'm going to say open UL and close UL. So UL and close UL, this stands for unordered list. So an unordered list. And the default behavior for an unordered list is going to be a list of bullets. And then we have to specify our list items. So we'll say here open LI and then close LI. And this specifies a list item. And I'm going to say here muscle ache. And then I'll make another list item here and I'll say fatigue. I'll make another list item here and I'll say headache. I'll make another list item here and I'll say loss of appetite. I'll close the list item there. And what this is doing is it's defining an unordered list of muscle ache, fatigue, headache, and loss of appetite. So if I save this here and do a refresh, we now have this unordered list here. So other symptoms include, and we have muscle ache, fatigue, headache, and loss of appetite in a list there. And that's what we call an unordered list. Then one more type of list is the ordered list. So an ordered list actually put things into an order where you've got like 1, 2, 3, 4 used as the default sort of the default sort of ordering of things. It's possible to use CSS again to modify what that looks like. So instead of like 1, 2, 3, 4, you can actually use CSS to have it look like Roman numerals and different things like that as well. But we'll just make a basic ordered list next. So we'll say the common cold can be caused by many different viruses, and we'll say including, and we'll make our ordered list here. So I'll say open OL, close OL, and OL is for ordered lists now. So open OL and close OL, and then we'll put our list items in here. So I'll say LI, and I'll say rhinovirus, and I'll say about 30 to 80% of common cold cases are caused by rhinovirus. Open LI, and I'll say coronaviruses, and I'll say about 15%. Close LI. And then I'll say, oh, I think I spelled that wrong. Corona viruses. And I'll say open LI. And then I'll say here influenza viruses. And then I'll say about 10 to 15%. Close LI. And we would say this is an ordered list because the data is ordered somehow, right? Like I'm kind of listing out what causes the common cold in terms of viruses with an order based on like how many of common colds are caused by, these particular types of viruses. So if I save this and do a refresh, now we get, the common cold can be caused by many different viruses, including, and I get like 1, 2, 3, 4, and we've got, the list sort of with an order here now. And so you want to use the unordered list if the data is not ordered. You'd want to use the ordered list if the data is ordered somehow. That's the general idea with it. Then one other HTML element, or actually a couple other HTML elements I'll mention just quickly here. One thing you might want to do is like put some kind of a separator in between chunks of data here. So like maybe after this sort of opening section here, before we go to symptoms, I want to have some kind of separator. One thing you can use is you can use the horizontal rule element to do that. So if I say here, open HR, and then just this closing with the slash here, because it's a singleton element as well. It's an element with no closing tag. So we put the slash there. This here is going to make a horizontal rule. So if I do a save here and do a refresh here, we get that horizontal line there now. And I could put a horizontal line in between all the different sort of subsections here. So like maybe before we get into the causes here, I'll also put in a horizontal rule. And if I put one here, maybe before more information as well. So before more information, I'll put it in HR too. And I'll do a refresh over here. And now we get the sort of separation between the sections there as well. So one other thing we could do as well is use the break tag or the break element. The break element looks like this. It's another singleton element. Let's say I want to put an extra space in between these two paragraphs here. I could use the break element. So the break element basically inserts a space into the document. So I could say BR and then like slash to close it because it's a singleton. And this basically inserts a new line into the document. It inserts a break line into the document. So I could save this and do a refresh. And now those paragraphs are separated by an extra space. And that's because of this break element here. And it gives you that behavior of giving you a break in the document there. And so this has been a basic rundown of making an HTML document and some of the most common elements, but there are many more elements that we can learn. You can find a link to the source code in the video description.